Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi. Joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, and we have a guest today, Still Curtain contributor Mitch Wolfe. We're going to be talking about Steelers draft, obviously, the Allen Robinson trade here. We're going to share our thoughts a little bit later in the pod about the players that we like best, the players we like least, who the Steelers should target in the draft. But let's kick things off real quickly here. I want to talk about the Jalen Hurts contract that the Eagles just handed out. $51 million per year, Shayne and Mitch. That's a lot of money to give to Jalen Hurts. But I understand when we talk about franchise quarterbacks, at what point do teams draw the line and are just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't give this high percentage of my cap. I know the cap goes up every year. It's something that they had to do. Don't get me wrong. Big contract. He passes Aaron Rodgers, top contract in the NFL. What are your thoughts on that, Shayne? We'll start with you.
Well, first, I think that he definitely is a player that, because of the way that he's gotten to this point, and I was somebody going into the year that really wasn't high on him at all. I just kind of felt like at some point he was going to stop getting better. And once again, he proved that's not the case. He just gets better every year. Obviously, it's going to be hard for him to probably surpass the level of play he played at last year, but if he can play at that level or close to it during this contract, in 2 or 3 years, it's going to look like a bargain. And I think that's the main thing here is getting a quarterback contract done as soon as you can with a guy that you trust, that you like, is the way to do it, because you see, like, obviously the Lamar Jackson situation, it's a little bit different because, different things going on there. But if you don't lock those guys up as soon as you can, you're going to fall behind the 8 ball and you're going to pay more than you need to. And it is a big contract, obviously $255 million, but I believe the full guarantees is 179-ish, which is still a ton of money to guarantee. But you're seeing like no one has really hit that Watson contract where it's mostly guaranteed. Like that's definitely something they were able to avoid, which is great for them. And again, like you said, you kind of have to do it. This guy just took you to a Super Bowl. The pieces around him are still there for the most part. You're going to be able to go on hopefully a couple more runs over the next few years. And worst case scenario, if the contract looks bad in like 3 years, then you had 3 years of really high, high end talent, and you probably get that out of him now. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because, like you said, it is going to be a bargain pretty quickly. Like this might not even be a top 3 quarterback contract by the time the season starts.
Yeah, a couple months.
And it might not be a top 5 by next offseason. This is going to, and especially the first year, I think his salary is only like $6 million.
Yeah, they
so
pushed
this
that
year,
out,
in terms of being able to acquire talent to surround him with, should be fine. I am a little concerned about the brain drain on the coaching staff in terms of Shane Steichen leaving for Philadelphia. And we saw how much that brain drain affected Carson Wentz with the Eagles after his MVP season and also his injury, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I mean, like you said, they had to make this move. Like you said, it's going to be a bargain contract. I mean, and this when these numbers came out, and I just thought about the ranking of quarterback contracts, thought, man, the Chiefs are like having Patrick Mahomes.
Gosh.
I was just going to mention that, like $45 million a year for Patrick Mahomes. My goodness, does that look like a steal right now?
Well, plus the length of it, like they have so much flexibility at the back end because all that bonus money is paid out, and like they don't have to work, like they can move stuff around. Like that deal is very unique, obviously, but it's still like it looks better and better as we kind of go.
I'm surprised that players, especially established players, are willing to do those types of deals anymore, knowing that the cap goes up all the time. It's like the Tyron Smith taking a 10-year, $100 million deal. Like you are better than that. You can take more money than that if you're willing to just have smaller contracts. But super team friendly deal from Mahomes. Obviously, we'll see how this one works out with Hurts. Obviously, I mean, Eagles are a really good team. They're top 3 or 4 team in the league. So you can't mess around with quarterback position. You just have to. You got to pay the guy. You got to hope that he continues to progress. And if he plays like he did, if he continues to play that way, then he's going to be worth the money. They might end up winning another championship here. So let's talk about the Allen Robinson trade here. A lot of different reactions on Twitter as soon as the Steelers announced this move. First thing that went to my head, Shayne and Mitch, was I know Robinson has a massive contract, like 3 years, $46.5 million. Obviously, I didn't think that there was a chance the Steelers were going to pay that. So I knew that the Rams were going to have to take on a lot of the money there. So it ends up being Steelers are swapping 7th round picks with Los Angeles, and they're going to pay $5 million in base salary. And that's basically it. So very low risk involved here, but I also think your potential reward is relatively low as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you guys have a different opinion, I want to hear what you have to think. I don't think that Robinson played very well. I watched quite a bit of him last year as dumpster fire as the Rams were. I didn't think that he was very spectacular. And I mean, certainly not a difference maker type player. He did play with several different quarterbacks. and he was suffering through injury, so that definitely plays a factor there. What do you guys think of this trade?
I think for me, the way that the trade was structured is why it's okay for me, because you don't really give up anything, essentially. You move down 17 spots in the 7th round, which, like, realistically, you're hoping you get a guy who makes the team the first year in that spot
For
anyway.
sure.
You
Yep.
know, maybe not
There's
if
a
you
lot of
pick.
con.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, maybe not all the
Yeah.
time, but so that makes it kind of, for me, like, I almost can just dismiss this as just like the Steelers are taking a shot on a veteran receiver where the receiver room
Yeah.
is very young or just has its issues, right? I think that the talk of them, like, not being in for receiver in the draft shouldn't really be the case, because it doesn't mean anything to me that he's on the roster.
Mhm.
If he gives you something this year or even next year, depending on how they structure that, because I know he'll have 2 years left on his deal, I think, then great. But I'm not expecting him to be anything better than maybe the 4th or 5th option in the passing game. Maybe he can coach up some of the younger guys in the room. Maybe he can be a good presence for them. And for $5 million, there's worse ways to spend $5 million. I think we're already spending worse $5 million anyway on the roster, depending on who you're looking at. So overall, I'm fine with it because of the structure of it. But again, if you're looking at this as like a win for the Steelers, it's got more of potential to be a win than a loss, obviously, because you don't really lose anything regardless. But I would definitely hold your expectations pretty low for this one.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's hard to really think of a scenario where this trade ends up being a loss because, again, you're trading back in the 7th, which I think it's interesting that you're seeing a lot of teams do this now.
Yeah, just
Instead of just trading picks straight up, you're seeing them swap and just move down and keep their pick. But yeah, I mean, moving down in the 7th for paying $5 million for a decent receiver, like I think that's a great move. I think I'm a little more bullish. I think that's the right animal on this trade than you guys. Like,
yeah,
I thought it was interesting thinking about what role he's going to fill, because
right.
Johnson, even though he has the build and skill set to be the slot receiver, doesn't really do that much.
No.
Pickens, again, did it a little more later in the year and is okay, could develop there more. And Robinson he played there. It's about like 35% of the snaps there.
35%.
Yeah. So, and given his build, you think of him more as an X receiver, and that's how he came into the league. But I think he can definitely be a very solid slot receiver. Kind of, again, not maybe the heights of it, but kind of what Juju was during his last few years.
That big slot type.
Yeah, the big slot, the contested catch guy over the middle, which is kind of something that the Steelers were missing a little bit of. So
that's true.
I really don't. I think this is a really good move. I do think he's wide receiver 3. I think he's going to be more reliable, and you can play him more consistently than a guy like Calvin Austin, who, even if things work out well, he's mostly
takes less pressure off him, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You don't have to ask him to do as much, because I think that there's definitely upside with him and his skill set, but asking him to be the 3rd receiver after missing an entire rookie year is a lot, even for an offense that might not use their 3rd receiver all that much. Like,
and like you said, Robinson can be that veteran presence that kind of can coach the younger guys up. Given the Steelers that they don't have, especially like a lot of day 3 capital, and they have so many pressing needs, I kind of am more of the mind that this does take receiver off the board for them, especially in the earlier rounds. There were guys that I really liked. I was like, oh, this would be a fun 2nd round pick, but now I just don't think that that's going to be the case with this move.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Mitch. I think that at the very least, it makes the Steelers are going to kind of ignore receiver early in the draft. Maybe if they stumble upon something, pick 80, pick 120 that they really like, and they think the value is great there.
Value,
other than that, though, but I mean, even those guys, so drafting someone right there, you're bumping somebody off the roster at that point. And is it going to be worth it for them? I don't know. But I do agree with you with the role with Robinson. I think he plays the slot, like 150-ish snaps in that role last year. Mostly been an outside receiver in his career, and really his forte is not route running, but 2.2% drop rate is fantastic. I think he's a guy you can just kind of target over the middle of the field, super reliable. And so you hope he gets back to form. Like if he plays like he did in 2020, I mean, it's going to be an awesome trade for the Steelers.
It's huge,
it's just, again, we're talking about a guy that turns 30 this summer. And we're going on 3 years removed from that guy since we've seen him play more than 12 games in a season, or since we've seen any sort of relevant production. And so I think that's what we're getting there. But again, I think all 3 of us would agree that this is a low risk, potentially medium type reward for the Steelers here. So nothing wrong with it. No complaints on our end at all. If you guys are joining us now, please drop us your questions over here in the chat. We'd love to get to those. Absolutely. Ask us your questions pertaining to Allen Robinson, Steelers draft. And we'll definitely discuss those here. All right, let's talk Steelers pre-draft visits. This list got a big shakeup here, one we weren't not expecting. So let's talk about the 4 new names that were added. And the 4 players who mathematically had to have been the guys that didn't make the cut for some reason or another. We don't know exactly why right now.
Right.
But let's start at the top of the list because these were unexpected. We had those visits already scheduled, 32 total. 2 of them were local, and we thought the list was done and finished.
Yeah.
It turns out some of those players didn't show yet, and so 4 players were replaced with 4 other players. And I'm loving this pre-draft visit list. And I know that it's just a list. Steelers can't draft every player that's on here, Shayne and Mitch, but in terms of comparing this to like previous years, I'm super excited about this list. Like, I like almost every name that is on there this year. So let's start with the top name on the list. And I want to hear what you guys have to think about this. Broderick Jones. Shayne knows that I'm a big Broderick Jones guy. I have been since the start. I don't know how realistic it is. I do know that if, like, in terms of if you care about betting lines at all, I think he's set at like the 16.5-ish range. Steelers pick 17, obviously. I love that they got this visit in here. Now, I think Broderick was a guy who checked the box anyway. Tomlin and Kahn were there at Georgia's Pro Day. There's clearly interest. He has the trifecta now. He has the Pro Day visit. He's got the pre-draft visit, and they met with him formally at the Combine. And so the fact that he had all 3 of those things together, it makes him a strong candidate to be this first-round pick. And I am loving that, assuming that he's here on the board at 17.
I think for me with it is, again, we've kind of known that they were interested in him, obviously, because of the Pro Day visit and the formal Combine meeting. And the fact he wasn't on the top 30 visit list didn't really like change anything for me on that or like really move the needle. I just felt like they probably just didn't need to do it. They had other guys they wanted to bring in. But the fact that they did choose to bring him in over some of the guys that got bumped off, I think does really give you a strong indication that if he falls to 17, especially if their top need or top interest is in one of the corners, like if they don't like the guys there at that point, if Jones is there at 17, I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't take him. And I get it. I mean, he's to me got the most upside potential athletically at the tackle class. Like, maybe not the best day 1 starter for sure of this group, but I think that he wouldn't necessarily have to. I think he would probably beat, one of the guys out at least in camp if given the opportunity, just because of the talent difference. But if he didn't play right away, he's a guy that doesn't probably really need to anyway. It might benefit him anyway. So
yeah, I agree in terms of the evaluation side of Jones. I definitely agree with the upside thing. I think that there's a chance that he does end up being the best offensive tackle out of this draft by the end of their rookie contracts. So getting him, and because of that, I'm not sure he gets to 17.
That's the
then
problem.
again, if he does, again, if he does, then I feel like that would be a lock.
Yeah, good value.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to note here, guys, is that there's only 3 guys this year that check the box in terms of Pro Day visit with Tomlin and Kahn. You got to check that box.
Yes.
Pre-draft visit and Combine visit. And that is Broderick Jones, Brian Brzee, and Joey Porter. And I put in a little asterisk next to Porter because Tomlin and Kahn, were at the NFL owners meetings. However, there was a huge group on hand for that, and they quickly brought him in after that. So I think that he would have checked that box, obviously, had those guys been available. That's a very short list.
It was like 9.
Yeah, I think they probably know enough about him
for sure. And again, if we're looking at this like past years, like if the Steelers now, it's obviously different. Kevin Colbert's not there, but if we're looking at this like years past, where it's like, all right, we knew the Steelers loved Najee. What was their pick? They took Najee. We knew they were taking a quarterback, and we probably should have been able to follow those breadcrumbs to Kenny Pickett. If that's the case this year, and you just had to make a prediction, I would say Porter, because it's the guy that has been connected with the team from the very beginning. It'll be interesting to see if it works out that way. And if Porter and Broderick are both on the Jones or on the board on the Jones on the board when Steelers are on the clock,
that'll be real interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my pick is Broderick, obviously.
Yeah, you said that. Yeah,
help an offense that average 18.1 points a game. But it'll be interesting to see what they do in that case. We got a question here from Tyler. What would your least favorite pick be at 17? And it's hard to say, knowing how exactly.
We'll be getting there soon here at the end too. We'll be talking about that probably.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of our least favorite players there. All along for me though, it's been like I really don't like Brian Branch in that spot. I know he's a good football player. I think that's too rich for what his role is. And I think that Addison was the other guy all along that's like, I think, again, we're talking him up a little bit too much for the prospect that he's going to be. Again, we'll talk about our favorite and least favorite players towards the end of this draft here, or the podcast here. All right, let's move on to the next name on the list, and that is Brian Brzee. He was brought in for a visit this week. Again, another unexpected one. There's interest here, and enough so that he has to be at least considered a candidate at 17. Personally, I like Brzee a lot better. If you can get him at 32, not sure if he'll be available or not, but 17 seems a little bit rich. But obviously, we've got the interest. Again, he checks all those boxes. What are your thoughts on this visit?
I think the physical profile fits a guy that would be taken this high, but again, he didn't show enough, I think, in college with that profile to be drafted this high. And I'd be surprised if any team in that range drafted him other than maybe the Steelers if they do like him enough. And I get the thought process is obviously Cameron Hayward's getting older. The D-line depth is still iffy for sure. He would be, that athletic upside play that you can make there, but you guys know, and I'll be talking about him later. There's some other defensive tackles in this class that I like, a little bit more for the value. So I wouldn't love this pick either, but I understand the upside play there. It's just, again, he hasn't shown enough of it, I think, potential-wise at this point to take him this early in the first.
So given what I've watched of Brzee, I'm actually higher on him than a lot of other people, I think.
Yeah, I
and
think some consensus, yeah.
I think part of the reason is that I remember his 2020 tape, which was dominant as an 18-year-old, and then 21, he tears his tears his ACL. He's also then more known commodity, so offenses are doing more to take him away.
This is true. Yeah.
And then this past year, his sister passes away from illness.
There's
a lot of external context that I think goes. And in this past year, as the season went on, he kind of got back into football mindset. He got a lot better towards the end of the year. So my thing with Brzee, though, is that I'm not sure exactly how he fits into the defense. Again, there's a lot of talk, nickel is the new base, what have you. But as I've written, this team needs a nose more than anything, and Brzee can do that, but that's not
his role
where he's best.
Ideally, yeah.
So he's. I think that's a bit of a luxury pick. If he is there at 32, absolutely. But 17 might be, even though I like him in terms of that range, in terms of fit, able to contribute immediately. I'm not sure that that's the best pick there.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that assessment. And in terms of college career trajectory, it's not that dissimilar from a guy at a different position like George Pickens, who the Steelers drafted, where best season came as a freshman, super explosive, had a 98th percentile breakout age, awesome year. And then Pickens suffers an ACL tear before coming into the draft. So I think that Brzee has some of that going on. Obviously, all the upside in the world is there, at least as an interior pass rusher. You can see how this guy moves. And I think I said in one of the other pods, watch Brzee go through the bags and stuff, and then watch Jalen Carter do it. There's a notable athleticism difference between the two. Carter's a better player, but Brzee is an elite athlete at the position. Super intriguing guy. It's worth noting, like you said, some of the things that he was dealing with in terms of his injury, losing his sister. And I also heard too that he was suffering with some kidney failure at the time. He was playing up at 330 pounds, which is not at all his normal play weight. Just a bunch of added water weight on there as well. And I think that was because of that, what he was dealing with there. So definitely a guy that you have to project forward into his NFL career. And you can obviously assume that his NFL career should be better than what the production he was able to put up in college there. Let's talk about Darnell Wright now. Another visit for the Steelers here, one of these final four that they just threw in here at the last minute. I am a big Darnell Wright fan, and I don't know how you guys feel about that. I'm interested to see. I really like his tape. I thought his tape made a big step forward this year. He obviously fills an important position of need, and you can argue in today's NFL, left tackle, right tackle. Yes, I'd prefer to have the left. I think right is still extremely important, and yes, Darnell Wright will be a right tackle in the NFL, not a left tackle. This is a guy you have to take at 17. You are not getting him at 32. We're hearing him now as high as possibly 9 overall to the Chicago Bears. And I heard that his range is between pick 9 and pick 20. And so this is a first round candidate we're talking about here, but he is a plug and play starter at 333 pounds. He moves exceptionally well, had an awesome game against Will Anderson of Alabama. I really like the potential of this pick here, and we can put it squarely on the map. At first we didn't think there was much interest in Wright because they didn't meet without him at the combine. If you look at his pro day, no Tomlin and Khan. We did learn later, though, that Andy Weidel was there with Pat Meyer. And so that's again, an asterisk, but a box I think that is checked. And now having this pre-draft visit is confirmation that he is a firm first-round candidate.
Yeah, I think with him, I wouldn't take him as high as we'd have to take him. I think I really like him a lot in terms of his ability to pass protect right away. but I don't know how high his upside is at this point as a player. And the fact that he is strictly right tackle isn't that much of a knock, because again, in the NFL at this point, you have to have 2 bookend tackles. Like, you can't afford to have somebody out there that is a turnstile in pass protection. So that really isn't a big deal for me, because I think that if you really wanted to knock a core 4 back over to left, you could do that. If Moore is just a better player, then he can play at left still too. But I just don't think I'd want to take him at 17. I think there's just going to be better players there, regardless of whether you think he's the best tackle on the board or not. I think there's going to be other positions or other players that I'd have higher ranks. So that's kind of my thing with him. But I understand the hype with him to a certain degree. He had some of his best games against some of the best players in this class at edge, and even Brazil. Like, I guess they lined up a good bit too in the Clemson game. So that's there. But I don't know if I want to make my decision based off just that at this point. So.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Wright fan, and we'll get into it later. I just didn't think his tape was as consistent. I'm also a little concerned about, and it's not as big of a transition for the offensive lineman, but this is a consistent concern with all the Tennessee players is how does that offense translate to the NFL?
The scheme is
I mean, I saw this funny thing about Jalen Hyatt today, where it was like quotes from scouts and coaches that just went absolutely in on him because his game just doesn't translate at all because of how wonky that offense is. And again, for offensive tackle, it doesn't matter as much, but I'm just not a big a fan. I've come to terms with the fact that it seems like he is going to be a likely target at 17, but that just wouldn't be a player I'd want to take there.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, definitely a lot of different opinions on him. The range is pretty big. I know I looked 3 weeks ago at the consensus board. He was 49th.
Yeah,
I believe he's jumped up to 19th at this point. And I can understand why. I mean, if you look at his 2021 tape, I agree. I don't think that it was very good.
His left tackle tape especially is rough.
Yeah.
Yes. He took a big step up at right tackle this year. Yeah. Again, I think we point to the game against Will Anderson. I thought he was very solid. Followed up with a good Senior Bowl. He's a 21-year-old senior. And I think that he still has youth and potential. And like I said, you don't often find guys that are as quick-footed as he is at that size. And so I think there is something there with that. I know that there are several in the business that like him better than Broderick Jones. Now, I obviously would pick Broderick Jones if he was there for the Steelers. But it's at least worth mentioning. Another guy, again, like these last few visits here that the Steelers have made, these are first round candidates that we're looking at between Broderick and Darnell Wright. And I think there's at least a decent chance that one of those is the pick. Really interesting, real quick. Darnell Wright, ESPN released their analytics, the ESPN analytics of the most likely picks in the first round. It was Darnell Wright for the Steelers. I believe they gave him close to a 10% chance to be that selection. So just a little interesting little tidbit there for you. Let's talk about the final visit here. We round out these top 30, and that was tight end Darnell Washington of Georgia. I like Washington. And this is not a player I don't think that you would have to take at 17. This would be a candidate at 32. He doesn't make it to 49. The traits are just too good when you're talking about a guy that is taller, longer, heavier, and tested as a better athlete than Rob Gronkowski. It's just, you don't find the combination in a tight end who already blocks extremely well in college. Obviously, it's a projection forward. I still think that one of his best comparisons is like a Mercedes Lewis type in the NFL, where he's going to be the big, long tight end who excels at blocking, who might never develop into a great pass catcher, but worth mentioning this visit because the Steelers, again, they were at Georgia's Pro Day, Tomlin and Kahn, and now they bring him in for a pre-draft visit. That's two very important boxes that Washington checks here. And so we have to think that he's a strong candidate to be that pick at 32 if he's available. And again, Steelers have other needs. They clearly have other needs other than tight end, but the interest is enough that the Steelers were willing to do this. So something to think about.
I think the thing with him for me at this point is if you take him at 32, I understand because he's so different from Pat that those two don't conflict. Like, they can play off of each other. They can be on the field at the same time and not give you the same skill set, which is obviously really important if you're going to do a lot of two tight end sets. You don't want two of the same guys running around out there. And obviously, maybe if you had two Travis Kelce's, that'd be cool, but that's about it. So for me, like, he definitely adds that element as a run blocker and as a pass protector if you keep him in on passing downs, which I think is interesting too, as an idea for use, especially early on in his career. But, and you kind of alluded to it, Tommy, I don't know if the upside is there as a pass catcher. I think he's going to probably be a very good red zone target just because of his size, but he doesn't really have the verticality on top of size as well. So he's kind of got to use his body to be the main weapon there. He doesn't separate really, despite the athletic testing. Like, I don't really think he separates off of guys very well at all. He kind of has to get going. And then once he does, if you can get him the ball in like crossers or in the flat and let him just run up the field and run over people, he's really good at that. But he's never going to be one of the more modern, like, move tight ends. And that's okay. But you have to understand that when you draft him, like, the upside as a pass catcher might not be there. So how much do you value what he's going to bring in the run game and the passing game as a pass protector as well? And I think for the right team, 32 would be a decent value. I don't know if our needs line up well enough to take him that high when there's going to be other players that'd be a bigger impact at 32, especially.
If positional value didn't matter, I would take Washington at 17. But it does. I really like Washington. I think the upside is there to develop into a better receiver simply because Georgia also had a tight end who was going to be a top 5 prospect in next year's class. Also on the field that they were like, we're going to use you as the main wide receiver, and they would, get him the ball a ton. And Washington was the second tight end option. And I don't think Washington gets to 32 because I think too many of the teams that are picking in the back end of round 1 will want that essentially tight end. Like, I think about how him on the Bengals and like how he could be that extra blocker that would help.
I've watched him there a lot in mocks for that reason.
I love that one. I mean, the Saints, even the Eagles, so then they can move Goddard around.
Why not, right?
The Chiefs moved Kelsey around more. Like, I just don't think he's going to get there without a trade. So I think it's I get why they're doing it. But I just don't think he's going to be there at 32. In terms of the visits, and I think we'll get into this next, but I think that it's telling that a lot of those guys that they quote canceled the visits with, they essentially already had met with multiple times, and they essentially said, okay, we kind of know what you are, and we want to get other guys in the building. And it's interesting when you do that in favor of a guy like Jones, so they have already met with multiple times.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about those other visits here. 4 were canceled, as we know. And again, just doing the math here, those 4 players have to be Dawan Jones, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State, Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback, Keely Ringo from Georgia, and Jervon Dexter from Florida. Now, let's just take these one at a time here real quick. Dawan Jones, we heard speculation that the Steelers were notably upset with the way that he showed up at his pro day. He didn't finish. He didn't go through agility testing or anything that way. There were rumors that he was up around 400 pounds. Although he did not weigh in, he elected not to be remeasured or reweighed. This concerns me. It concerns me so badly because I worry about a work ethic thing with him. When you get anytime you get players of this size, it reminds me of very much of like an Isaiah Wilson type thing where you're getting a guy that is just not dedicated. Millions of dollars are on the line, and you are not making your best effort at these opportunities where all eyes are watching you. And so I do wonder if that contributed to the reason why. I know the Steelers probably did have a decent idea of who Dawan Jones was. And I think that I have to believe that Andy Weidel really liked the idea of getting a big, long offensive tackle like he had in Jordan Mailata, who was excellent for them. But I don't know if he's a guy that they would consider at this point or not, or maybe they've seen enough of them and said, okay, at this certain point in the draft, I will still take you if you're on the board. Just interesting to note there because of the rumors that they weren't satisfied with the way that Jones showed up there.
I do think that's something that has to be considered if they were upset by that. And I get it. I think a player like him, like I admittedly, and you know this, Tommy, like I like him a lot as a player just from what I've seen on tape, especially this past year. But this is something that you have to factor in. Like if you don't think he's got the work ethic, if you've met with him and you're not comfortable with him as a person, maybe not as a player, but as a person, that's something that, especially for a team like the Steelers, like that's going to matter a lot to them. So it is interesting to see if that is part of why, or if it was just they know enough about him. And I think it could definitely go either way, but it's something you have to think about for sure when you're evaluating that spot.
The story of Dawan Jones is so interesting because in 2021, they essentially shuffled their entire O-line just to get him on the field.
Yeah.
And because they were just so impressed with his physical uniqueness. But then this year he's even better. And the offensive line in general, it doesn't have as much talent around him, but he performs a lot better. And I think it was Dane Brugler of The Athletic who talked about it, where he said this was the year where Jones really committed to football. He still thought of himself as a basketball player before. And this year he like
saw
really
the dunk that he
clicked. Yeah. But then you have this concern where, he shows with the combine and it's good and he does testing and it's decent for a guy of his size. But then the pro day, you have that alleged weight gain where it's a huge problem. So I think for that reason, and Jones is just so uniquely built where he's so top heavy.
He is, yeah.
Which it's so unique and not necessarily in a good way. That you just have concerns about his ability to athletically keep pace at the NFL level. So I never really bought into him being an option for the Steelers around 132 maybe, and still wasn't a huge fan. And now I'm not even sure 49 is going to be an option.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're legitimate concerns. And like I said, I know how big and long you are. You're one of the biggest NFL players we've ever seen. You still don't need to play at 380 pounds. Get in football shape and get ready for the NFL. And that's what I want to see you do. Let's flip it and let's go with a guy who is historically small. And I'm talking 0 percentile of NFL cornerbacks ever drafted in the first round. He would be the absolute smallest. And I don't think he's going to go that high because he's such an outlier. But that is Emmanuel Forbes, the Mississippi State corner. I love his tape. I love the tape. But at 166 pounds, that's going to it's going to be hard for teams to kind of get behind that. This is the next visit that the Steelers supposedly canceled, and it didn't make the cut of that top 30. So again, we don't know the reasoning here. Maybe the Steelers wanted to go in a different direction or scheduling conflict. We don't know. We're not accusing one side or the other of canceling the visit. But we do know at this point with the 30 visits confirmed that Forbes was not one of them at this point. So interesting here. I was really hoping that he would have been a visit, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later, but quick thoughts on Forbes.
Again, you talked about the size. I think for me, like his tape is very fun. And I think that he plays with a physicality that you wouldn't expect for someone of his size to play with. But I think that is inherently part of the problem is, do you think he can retain that play style in the NFL and hold up and succeed there? I think it's a big question mark. I think he would be best served playing much differently in the NFL, a lot more off man, a lot more zone, just because it allows him to trigger downhill and use the length and athleticism he has instead of using it in a man coverage more often where he can get thrown around a little bit easier. Use those instincts and that ability, from coming downhill. I think that would be a better fit for him. And that's obviously not the real scheme fit for the Steelers at this point. So I think that if he goes to the right team who understands that and like put him in better positions to succeed, he could make good on like a round 2 draft pick. Round 1, though, I don't know if I'm willing to take the chance on the outlier size at that point.
Yeah, I think regardless of the weight, like he wasn't going to be a first round pick.
I don't think so.
Apparently in an interview on NFL Network, he did say that he is between 174 and 177 now. And he plans to be 180 by the start of the season. But to that, I would say, well, why weren't you 180 or 170 at any point?
Is there something going on?
Yeah,
like something going on? Because if there was, you should say it.
He might just not have the frame to put on the weight. And
I don't think so.
Again, I think the tape is good. I like the ball skills, obviously. And I like the consistency of the ball skills because there are guys, and a guy we'll talk about later, where people fall in love with 1 year ball skills production, and that can be an outlier. It can fluctuate wildly. Whereas Forbes consistently has gotten interceptions, broken up passes in a very zone heavy scheme. But I think for the Steelers, even though they are seemingly pivoting towards really focusing on ball skills and more zone type corners, this is still the AFC North. Yeah. And your corners are going to have to tackle. And the thought of Emmanuel Forbes coming up to try to tackle, even though he might not be on the team, but guys like Joe Mixon or Nick Chubb or even J.K. Dobbins and like trying to tackle them in December, just not the best.
The willingness is there, but is the ability.
This is another outlier like Travius Hodges Tomlinson, who's this one of the smallest players in NFL draft history, regardless of position. Like again, he's pretty willing and he has obviously NFL bloodlines, but at 5'7", 178, like there's just a lack of physical ability that it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, one of the teams did a weight analysis on Emmanuel Forbes, and they determined, I don't know how they do this, but they used a whatever to determine how much weight he could potentially gain. And it was only 183 pounds total soaking wet. So take that for what it's worth.
It was with pads on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it must have been pads and weights in his pants or whatever
it was
else.
The Bears, and they used that little box that just says analytics. And
that was such a
input
funny,
output.
such a funny.
He was also 168 pounds coming out of high school. So somehow in his college career, he got lighter going into the combine.
Probably 158.
Yeah, he's probably 150.
They always lie about their lie about their college, but I would like to see him gain the freshman 15 in college. That would have been nice.
Ideally.
In Mississippi, absolutely. How can you not?
Right.
Keely Ringo, another name. Again, Steelers are very familiar with this guy. They've been at Georgia's Pro Day. They're always at Georgia's Pro Day. They also met with him at the NFL Combine. So canceling this doesn't necessarily mean that the Steelers aren't going to draft Ringo, but it might mean that there was somebody else they wanted to get in. We don't know. Again, I don't want to speculate too much here, but that's the third name on the list. I think he's a guy who is destined to be a second round-ish player. Like, so many different opinions on this guy. I know PFF has him like 73rd on their board. Other people have him at like 23rd overall, I think, like Pro Football Network. So the range is huge on this guy, and it's a projection forward. You're talking about a 20-year-old player, one of the only 20-year-olds in the draft this year. It's an old class. And you're looking at the traits with 4.35 speed, 6'2", 200 plus pounds. That kind of stuff is rare, pretty stiff in his movements at times. A lot of people view him as a safety. So I think I don't know what it does in terms for the Steelers, but a guy that I would still count as on their radar, at least on day 2.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it before too, Tommy. I think he would be a better pro prospect as a safety. I do. I think that the stiffness is going to be kind of hard to ignore, and depending on the scheme that you put him in, I think if you ask him to do certain things as a corner early on, just play press man and get up in people's face and use his size and athleticism, he'll be okay. But I don't know if he'll ever be able to turn and run with guys the way that he should. Like, you saw him get burnt by guys that frankly don't have the athleticism he does in college. Like, and it comes down to at some point you have to be able to be the lateral athlete to play corner to a certain degree. Unless you're, a super freak. I mean, you get some of the guys like Tariq Woolen and everything else, but they have, I think, better lateral movement than him. I think that he would probably transition better as safety and have a longer career there if he did that. I don't think he will initially. I think a team will try to draft him as a corner, but it's really just going to come down to fit and the type of coaching he gets to see if he can make it work at corner long term.
Yeah, I mean, going into the year, I was a big fan of Ringo, and I think some of his criticisms got a little overblown. I think he was still better than people thought. And again, like you said, betting on him where he is now in terms of his age, his athletic ability, I think still has extremely high upside. For sure. I think this is more the case of, it's not a negative that they canceled the visit. I mean, they did combine, they had pro day, and then they had like a dinner with him at the pro day. So like, we know enough. We like where we're at with him. Maybe I think it was Brissy they haven't really met with much, or Darnell Wright, where they haven't. They didn't like Khan and Tomlin didn't meet with him. So it's like, all right, like we're good with where we are with Ringo. We still like him. Let's see if these other guys, we can meet with them and get some more positive impressions from them.
Last name on the list, Gervon Dexter. This one was interesting because I did think it was a guy that was Steelers would have liked. And now he really doesn't check those boxes that they look for anymore. So again, doesn't mean that they can't draft him, but it was interesting to see him get axed from the list. So quick thoughts on him.
I think that the thing with him ultimately is I think he's going to get drafted between 49 and 80, right? Unless we move up or down or whatever, like, I don't think the value 49 is there, but I think the value at 80 would be great. But he's probably going to go in the 60s if I had to guess, 70s. He's so weird to me because, and a lot of people have already said this, so I'm not saying anything new, but his ability just to get off the ball, if he could just do that consistently, he'd probably be rated a lot higher for me. But like, when you don't see it, like with a guy that athletic being the last guy off the ball all the time,
so slow.
It's just weird. Like, I don't know if it's just like he hasn't been coached up properly or what it is with him. But if they can figure that out, I mean, he might be an insane value on day 2. But again, you don't know that. You can't guarantee that, which is a weird thing to worry about at this point for a prospect. But I'm not surprised that they probably just are like, this might not be a guy that's going to be in our range, or that might be what it comes down to, or whatever. But yeah, that one is a little more concerning. Not concerning, but I'm not sure that one makes as much of an impact as the others.
I agree in that I think this cancellation is the most telling in terms of where the Steelers are in a prospect. And I also agree with you about the issues of Dexter and his get off.
It's just weird.
What's funny is that Maisie Smith, the defensive tackle from Michigan, who I think some people are kind of think the Steelers could be in on, had a very similar issue as a junior. Like was consistently last guy off the ball, and then senior year he fixed it.
They did have him in a weird like stance as a pass rusher too. If you've seen like they had him almost like in a squatty potty position.
The frog stand.
Weird. Yeah, it was very weird how they did stuff with him. But
so he kind of fixed it. So I'm kind of wondering if I feel like Dexter could do the same thing.
I'm sure he could.
And has a arguably a better physical profile. And I did him as a possible replacement at the nose tackle if he fell in the third round. But yeah, I mean, even though we use the visits as definitely an indicator for the first round, I think it's pretty telling that this guy might just not be a high priority on the board in the third round.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy you got to get with a good defensive line coach, and I feel like on the right team you can coach that up. He has a lot of stuff to work on. Obviously, I don't think the tape was great either. The flashes are there, but not even nearly as often as they were with like a player like Brian Brzee. And so he's a player that needs a lot of coaching still. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And for those who are live with us right now, please drop your questions in the chat. We'd love to be able to answer those. Only 8 days left to the NFL draft. So we want to make sure we get your questions in. We're going to go through now, and we're going to talk Steelers draft, the players that we really like, the players that we want to avoid. And so how do you want to do this, Shayne? We're going to go person by person, player by player.
Yeah, I think what we should probably do, just to make it a little bit more interesting, is I think we should do obviously the players we want to target first, and then we'll each give our first guy and talk a little bit about them and just cycle through until we get through them. Do the same thing for the prospects we don't want to draft.
There we go. So we're going to go relatively quickly here because we
don't want to spend too much time, but yeah.
So I'll also go ahead and start, and then we'll go right down the list. And I think we each have 4 guys for each. It was hard to narrow this list down because there are a lot of players I like, and there are a lot of players that I'm very questionable with. So my first name, Shayne, prospects that I would like the Steelers to target, and this particular one would be at pick 32, is Will McDonald IV. I love the traits here. And if you haven't watched Will McDonald, I encourage you to go put on his film. What he offers potentially as a pass rusher in terms of length, bend around the edge, quickness, explosion, it could be at a high level in the NFL if he's trained up to do so. And I think that one thing that needs to be considered with him is he was a former wide receiver when he came on at Iowa State. He's relatively raw. He is old. He's going to be a 24-year-old rookie. And I don't love that about him, but it's so hard not to see Randy Gregory when I put this guy on in terms of when you watch him in true pass rush sets with his length and hip flexibility and ability to bend around that corner. I think that's something that the Steelers are not lacking, but they could use another one of those guys, obviously. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with Highsmith. I know a lot of people would lose their minds if the Steelers draft an edge at pick 17 or pick 32. I'm about taking the best players at the most important positions. According to my board, he will be at value or above value at that point in the draft. And he obviously checks the box in terms of most important positions. I think edge, you can argue behind quarterback or maybe offensive tackle, and it's right there. So I really like McDonald a lot. I like what he offers. I think that he could give you not only the depth that you desperately need on the edge position right now, it gives you insurance if TJ gets hurt again for the 3rd year in a row. And in 2021, he had bumps and bruises, missed a couple of games. Last year was a significant injury. You don't want to see that happen again. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to play a player like Malik Reed out there. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with Highsmith. The Steelers may want to keep him. That's a lot of money to invest in the edge position. It's a high percentage of your salary cap. So Will McDonald's a player I'm all for at pick 32.
I get it. Again, because you look at the edge depth and it just doesn't exist. Frankly, it just doesn't.
Quincy Roche Hive, stand up.
Listen, hey, I hope he can be, at least
I love that
edge.
Pick. We talked about it. I love that pick.
Yeah, I know you did. Yeah. If he's the 4th edge, good. If he's the 3rd, I don't know. So I get the pick for sure, Tommy, there. My top guy that I would want to talk about, Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. Big surprise there, right? Not like I've talked about him a couple of times before on the podcast. But no, I think that especially, ideally at 49, but again, I'm high enough on him where I'd be okay with 32. But again, 49 is really where I'm looking to be able to get him, hopefully. I think he can play 3-tech. I think he can play nose. I think he can do all those things. I think his pass rush upside is higher than a lot of the guys that are going to be taken around the same range. again, I'm a Wisconsin fan, so maybe it's a little bit of bias there, but hey, the defenders from Wisconsin have mostly done pretty well. So I'm not going to, say that there's a guarantee is going to be great, but I would really like to see them add to the position in general. And I think he would be the top guy that I'd want to see them get based on where he's going to go. So.
Yeah, I'm equally high on Benton. I love his tape. I would love to get him at 49, but I'm not sure he's going to be there. Everything seems positive for him right now. For me, one guy that I really love, and this is a guy where I would love to get him at 32. I'm not sure he makes it there, honestly.
It's hard to say.
But it's Jack Campbell, inside linebacker from Iowa. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are just not many guys that come along with this physical, athletic profile who have good tape. And he's 6'4" and a half, 249 pounds, and his RAS, relative athletic score, is 9.98, which is the same in terms of now adjusted for time. It's the same as Luke Kuechly. And granted, his tape is not as good as Luke Kuechly, but this guy can do everything. He can drop in coverage, he can stop the run, he can even rush the passer a little bit. I think some of his numbers are not perfectly reflected on his tape in terms of his agilities, but his agilities are still incredible on tape for a guy of that size. And, I know the Steelers, they signed Cole Holcomb to be their, new every down middle linebacker. They signed Landon Roberts to be the 2-down thumper, the Vince Williams replacement. But Campbell would be the inside linebacker of the future, where he can be the guy, the Ryan Shazier replacement that they've been looking for so long. And frankly, given his size and his physical ability, I think there's a chance that he could be even better than Shazier. Maybe not as quick sideline to sideline, but given his versatility, he could be an absolute stud. And I would love if they could get him at 32.
Yeah, I am a Campbell fan. I would prefer to take the linebacker at pick 49. I just don't. We got to factor in positional value as well. But I do think that as the prospect, I think he's an excellent prospect. He checks all those boxes. Maybe doesn't play quite as fast as the 4.65 speed, but very much like in the Van Der Esch type mold, where you're still getting a very solid football player. I think he's going to be good for a long time.
Underrated length too as a linebacker for his size, because his size really helps him in covers a little bit, because he might be a tick slower than some of the modern linebackers, but his ability to reach guys or to keep his hands on guys gives him a little bit of an edge there too, I would say.
He's just always in the right position, and obviously uber productive at Iowa. The next name on my list of players I think the Steelers should target, this would also be at pick 32, is Darnell Washington. Already talked about him a little bit. I was excited for that visit. I know you guys not so much, maybe for Shayne. I'm a Washington fan, because I just think that at some point you have to ignore positions of need to take the best player on the board. And I think that's very much going to be the case, at least on my board. When it comes to Washington, you have an extremely rare traits-based prospect who's a 21-year-old tight end who's coming from the best football program in the nation. You just don't see guys like this very often. And in my mind, I'm already playing through my head now. I know Matt Canada is the offensive coordinator, so we don't know what all that would entail, but I can see a scenario where it's like, all right, the Steelers can actually run like true play action now out of 12 personnel and keep defenses guessing. You could have them go down the seam. You could be a red zone threat. You don't have to take Freiermuth off the field to put him on it, because Freiermuth could be your move tight end. I like the pairing together. I think it makes it the Steelers. I think it would make the Steelers have one of the strongest tight end pairings in the NFL. I would be a big fan of a situation like that. If it comes down to preference, I would take McDonald over because of the positional value. But I do think he's going to be one of the top 3 or 4 names that I would like when that pick rolls around, assuming he's still on the board there.
Yeah, I'll talk more about Washington a little bit later, I'll get into that. But my next guy is Tyreek Stevenson out of Miami, and I know Miami corner. I know. All right, let's pump the brakes. I'm thinking 49-ish is probably where I'd be looking at him. To me, he's a day one press man corner. I think he could play that role right away. I don't know how high his upside is. He is, I think, 3-year starter at Miami. I forget if he started all 4 years, but he's just been that type of player from the get go for them. And I think he probably once you got outside of the top 5 or so guys, a corner, I think that he's the one that for playing press man, I feel most comfortable dropping him in day one. Maybe he doesn't have to play a ton. Year one depends on how that shakes out with the corner room. But I think if you miss on or aren't able to draft one of the top guys at 17 or 32, I think he'd be a really good kind of consolation at pick 49.
I find Stevenson very interesting because he originally was at Georgia and was like their slot defender. And then he transfers to Miami, becomes a true outside corner, and is still very successful in that role. And I know Ike Taylor has commented how much he loves this guy. So I feel like I think for me, I'd prefer him in the third. Especially if they take a corner in the first, I think
especially
bumps it down. For me, my next guy is Anton Harrison, and I've written about how much I'm not a huge fan of taking an offensive tackle early in this draft, just because of how I feel about the offensive tackles that are currently on the team. But if they are going to do it, I would prefer it to be Anton Harrison at 32, because I really like this guy's tape. I think he is a mauler in the run game. A lot of people comped him to Charles Cross, but kind of with an inverted skill set, which Cross went a lot earlier. But I really like his tape. I think he can do a lot of things really well. He's shown improvement. He's another young guy. I think he just turned 21, but he's been a multi-year starter at Oklahoma. It's weird. They wanted to try him at right, and they started him there for a game and then flipped him back. Then they flipped their tackles back. But if the Steelers are really going to or if they're set on resetting their tackles, then I would really like Anton Harrison at 32 is still getting that starting corner at 17.
Yeah, I think you're getting decent value there. And I think that's the last of that tackle group, in my opinion, before there is a notable drop off right there in what you are getting. So that would be a guy who could play that left tackle role. My third name on my list of players that I want the Steelers to target is Emmanuel Forbes. Man, if I can get Forbes at pick 49, I know we talked about him already, skinniest corner ever. I'm okay with that because I think the tape is elite. I think it's fantastic. The 14 interceptions in the SEC. If this guy is 180 to 185 pounds, he's my number one cornerback in the class. He tops Christian Gonzalez. And that's how good I think Forbes is. It's comes down to, do you think you can put weight on him? Do you think he can stay healthy? How's he going to hold up against the run? Those are the type of questions. My thing is, even if Forbes is always a so-so player against the run, or even a below average player against the run, but he's elite in pass coverage with his 96 percentile wingspan and 4.35 speed and fantastic ball skills, that can be a guy who is extremely valuable at the next level. And so I'm super intrigued by him. I think that 32 is going to be a little bit rich, but I don't think he makes it farther than that. Honestly, I don't think he makes it back to that pick. There's talk about him going in the back half of the first round, that teams just don't care about the weight enough. They love the tape so much and the ball skills so much that they'd be willing to gamble on there. And I get that. So 32, I'd be okay with it. 49, I'd run to the podium with my card.
Yeah, I'll talk about him again more a little bit later. But I get, again, the tape. I get it. It's hard to watch him go, yeah, I just don't like him. It's just, again, the outlier stuff can be difficult to kind of place him. But my third guy, and this is, again, I'm in the camp that, like, ideally they don't have to do this at this point because they traded for Allen Robinson, but I still like some of the value in the day, like late day 2, early day 3 range for receiver. Jaden Reed out of Michigan State. I really like him a lot. I think he has a lot of untapped potential. That Michigan State passing game was just bad. Peyton Thorne, you're out of here. Get out of here. Like, just not good. But at Senior Bowl, he was lighting people up. I think he has a really good deep speed. He's a lot different from the rest of the receivers in the room. You know, Calvin Austin kind of has some of that, but he's smaller, not quite as, I think, has the ability to play outside as much as Reed could probably do as a deep threat. Really like him as, like, either I pick 80 is a little much just because of the value and the fact that we need other things, but especially, I mean, I don't think he'll fall to 120, but especially if he was there, I mean, it'd be hard pressed not to take a guy that has his skill set at that point. So
I feel the same way about Reed. I also really like his ability as a returner. So you could bring him in, and then you can get Gunner off the roster.
Yeah, get him out.
So my guy next is Felix Anudike-Uzomah from Kansas State. He's an edge rusher, and for me, this guy is kind of the middle ground between, this is going to sound crazy, Will Anderson and Will McDonald. And I say that because he's built very similarly to Anderson and was used similarly to how McDonald was used and kind of how Anderson was used at times. Despite being a very good outside edge rusher, they would bump him inside and play him as a 4-eye defensive end, which is not where he's going to play in the NFL. But he is a very good edge rusher. I really like him. I actually like him more than I like Tyree Wilson, the edge out of Texas Tech, who a lot of people have going number 2 overall.
Wilson's such a projection,
which I think is crazy.
He's such a projection. Yeah.
But yes, I like Felix better than him, and I think that, you know, you talked about that third edge rusher position. This would be a guy where I think you can bring him in, and then I see his development going very well. And there's even a world where you can say, all right, we have this guy, and we feel comfortable moving on from Alex Highsmith, or you just have 3 really good edge rushers. And,
which is,
you know, if TJ Watt continues to struggle with these injuries, you know, maybe, God forbid, they're like, okay, you know, we need you on the field, and that's just not happening. So we're going to stick with Felix and Alex Highsmith.
Yeah, I'm a Felix AU fan as well. And I think, I mean, again, I'm always a proponent of taking edge defenders. And I think that it's such a valuable position. You need it. And Steelers team revolves around their edge defenders getting after the
Really, the
quarterback.
defensive line
Nothing
in
works
general,
if you don't.
the pass rush.
It has to. And it has to. And it didn't in the first half of the year. And I think that's part of the reason why they were so bad, which brings me to my final player that I would love for the Steelers to draft. This one will cause some controversy, I'm sure, because I'm talking pick 17. That is Nolan Smith. I know that not everybody's going to be on board with that. No, it does not fill the biggest position of need. I do think you are getting a fantastic football player who potentially deserves to be a top 10 or 12 pick this year. I love the traits that he brings. I love the speed and burst around the edge. He's an all-time athlete at the edge position. I can just see so much Micah Parsons and Hassan Reddick in his game in terms of his flexibility and ability to just blow around the corner and disrupt lanes. He can stunt inside. He can do a ton of things for you. You can line him up wherever you want to line him up. He's just a football player. He's just a good football player who is going to help your defense out. I would not be upset with that pick, regardless of what the fan base, I know what the reaction would be if something like that were to happen. And not even saying it's something that's all that realistic, even though they were at Georgia's pro day. I just love Nolan Smith. I think he's going to be a great football player at the next level.
I just want to jump in with this one. So there's a world where if they do take Smith at 17 and Brian Brzee at 32, they get the number one recruit out of high school in consecutive classes.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't be great positions of need, but that would be insane.
It would be pretty funny though, no matter what. Good trivia in a couple of years too. I think with Smith, like, I really like him a lot too, but what's interesting to me about him is I think despite his size profile and his athletic profile, he's a more developed run defender than an edge rusher at this point, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's interesting that you get that type of physicality and ability to play the run out of a guy that size. I think because of his athleticism too, you don't have to just play him off the edge. Like, I think he can play off ball. I think he can do a lot of different things for. He can be a blitzer from inside. Like, there's a lot of things you could do with him, and that's part of him being a great football player. So
yeah, he talked about how much Georgia like asked him to two gap as an edge defender, which he was like, listen, I'll do it. And like, that's all you read anything about Smith. He's like the ultimate teammate, team leader, 100%. Everything.
Yeah.
He's like, I'll do it. But like, I would really just love to like pin my ears back and rush the passer again.
Yeah. Cause look at the athletic profile. I mean, of course he wants to do it. He knows obviously that's what gets you paid too. Get you drafted.
And I think he's definitely a guy that projects forward at the next level. Obviously he's gonna be more productive as he was as a pass rusher than he was in college.
So my last guy, and this is again, it kind of soured a little bit just because with the news of things and kind of how this pro day went and everything, but I still really just like DeJuan Jones is his floor as a tackle, like just the size and the better athleticism, especially when he tested at the combine than you would expect from a guy his size. I mean, tested much better than like Orlando Brown Jr., for example, some of the other guys that are in that tier of like height and weight type of guys. And will he ever be able to handle speed? Probably not, unless he lost a lot of weight. But again, he's just there's so much you have to do just to get around the guy, let alone through him. And you're just not going to probably go through him realistically, not his size. And his run, blocker obviously is a road grader just with his size. He's not going to be a guy in the move probably. You're not going to want to run a lot of like wide zone or anything like that with him, but he can still road grade, get out of the way. I think he fits what they want to do offensively. It's just, can you get him, at 32? Ideally, obviously you don't want to take him any higher than that. If he falls to 49, if you haven't taken a tackle, especially, I think he would make a lot of sense there, especially as well. But again, some of the stuff that's come out with things maybe sours that a little bit for me.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with Jones is, Tommy, you mentioned how after Harrison, the tackle class kind of falls off to Jones. I would say that the gap between Jones and then the next tier of guys is also wider. Huge. So that's definitely an issue, because then it's just kind of like developmental dart throws, honestly.
Even like Bergeron, which people like a lot. I think he's he'll be a better interior player.
Yeah, he's a guard, and the arm length for him is like, it's not at the threshold the Steelers have for their tackles. So for me, my final guy this would be a guy that if it happened in the third round, I wouldn't be shocked. I think he's rising up boards. I like originally thought, we can get him in the fourth, and now I'm just not sure it's going to happen. But this is a guy that I see as a Cam Sutton replacement, and it's Dartavius Quan Martin out of Illinois. And this is a guy who has played free safety, he's played slot corner. He started his career as an outside corner, I believe. So he is like Sutton, has played everywhere. He's done a bit of everything. He brings a lot of the same mentality that a guy like Devon Witherspoon brings, who I'll get to in a minute. But you're not relying on him as much in terms of being just a pure cover corner, but he can be a chess piece. You move around the field, and this is a guy where it's like, okay, we don't need you to come in and be a huge contributor immediately, but we can sprinkle you in on plays, and essentially we can rely on you in more situations than we can a guy like Arthur Mollett. And as the years progress, where Patrick Peterson retires, I think Martin would be like Sutton, that he's the guy that sticks around and is that glue guy in the secondary that can be a very reliable starter for you in a variety of different roles.
Yeah, that Illinois secondary is gonna have a lot of guys.
Yeah, it's
in
crazy.
this class. Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
too, so, yeah.
I've watched some of his tape and I'm impressed. I agree. I think that he would be a good player to target later on for sure. I think he would fill that role perfectly. Let's get to our list, Shayne, of players to avoid in the draft. Now, this name, my first name, is not necessarily one that I think stands a high chance anymore at this point.
No, I don't think.
But I'm going to say Jordan Addison because I've said it since the beginning of the process. I always thought that Addison was a little bit overrated. I know that he was extremely productive with Pickett in 2021. Again, we're talking about a guy that has played with 2 first-round quarterbacks. Caleb Williams is going to be one as well. And he's undersized. I don't think that he's great after the catch like people think that he will be projecting forward. I think that he's kind of the good at everything, great at nothing type of receiver. And when that guy is only 5'11" and 170 pounds with 30-inch arms, I think that his role might be a little bit more limited than some expect it to be in the NFL. And I think he's going to be primarily confined to the slot with the ability to potentially be a mid-level number 2 receiver. I just think that what you'd have to invest in him the risk isn't worth it at that point, because I think that it's a pretty unspectacular receiver class. And I think if you throw him in last year's class, I don't think we're talking about him as high throughout the process as we have with Addison.
Yeah, I think the problem ultimately, like you said, is that the physical profile doesn't match a player that usually gets drafted as high as people were kind of thinking going into the draft. Like, I like his tape a lot still. I think he did a lot of great things in college, especially at Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, 17, especially, even 32, like, especially now that we did make a move a receiver, I don't think it's something we have to worry about at this point, probably. But again, there was a lot of reasons that he was being mocked to them early on, and maybe those reasons are kind of fallen by the wayside now. But I get why you'd have him as a guy you don't want to target. For me, my first guy, Manuel Forbes. So sorry, Tom. Again, I like the player. I like what he does. I don't know if I'm willing to take him high enough to get him where I feel comfortable, putting him out there early on. And because again, if you take him as high as people are going to take him, you expect him to contribute immediately. And I think that the problem with that ultimately is you just don't know if he's going to physically hold up against NFL offenses. I just don't know if he'll be able to do that. So it's a risk. It's certain teams I think would be better fit to make that choice and take that risk on than us, but it's going to be a risk almost kind of no matter who takes him. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about Forbes. I spoke about it earlier. So I mentioned this with concern to Forbes's ball skills earlier, and I'm going to come back to it. My guy that I really would not like Steelers draft, and frankly, I'm not sure he's going to even be there, but I know that there are some people that were like, "Oh, this would be a great pick," and he just fits the mentality. And the problem is he doesn't fit the team because I don't think he's that good. It's Devon Witherspoon out of Illinois, and I wrote a whole entire article about this because a lot of people thought this would be a good pick. And frankly, even though the Steelers are looking for more zone corners with ball skills, I found that Witherspoon's production in 2022 was fluky more than anything. He had 3 interceptions and 14 passes broken up, but I think he had more. He had 2 interceptions in 3 years prior, and I don't think his passes broken up even added up to that in his 3 years prior. So this year was more a fluke than anything in my mind. Furthermore, his size doesn't match up with what the Steelers want a corner, especially when you compare it to all the other corners that they have had meetings or visits with during this process, which we discussed earlier. Those meetings and visits are huge for predicting whether the Steelers are interested in a player or not. And they have not met with Witherspoon at all. So I'm watching his tape. I did not like Witherspoon's tape that much. He's got that dog in him, whatever. He comes downhill and tackles. I don't think he's going to be able to consistently stay with NFL wide receivers and man coverage. So his zone corner purely, who has to line up with at least 7 yards of cushion on almost every play. He doesn't have the length to press, and he doesn't have the speed to recover. So I just really don't think this would be a smart pick. And frankly, I think Witherspoon is going to be wildly overdrafted come next week.
Yeah, Mitch, I kind of like Witherspoon's tape, but I do agree with you. I don't think he projects forward as well as what people are saying, because he does have a 14th percentile wingspan. He came in 181 pounds. I think that you are hoping that he ends up having a Tre'Davious White-like career, and you can get by with being a mediocre athlete. And he's not a guy that I don't think I would gamble on that early. And so I don't have him.
My thing is, if you're going to go that high, I need to be able to play you and do everything with you as a cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you are physically limited to being a very specific type of player, I don't think you deserve to be a top 5 prospect or a selection.
Yeah, and I think his traits, honestly, are probably best suited for the slot in the NFL when you project forward in terms of athleticism and the lack of length there. So I do agree with that. I think it's not a popular take, but I do think that that's the correct take there on him. My second name of players that I would avoid if I were the Steelers is Siaki Ika, the defensive tackle out of Baylor. This one scares me a little bit. I've watched so much Ika tape so far, and boy, there's no pass rush ability. You are getting a one down player. And even in that one down, he didn't even grade out as a very good run defender last year. And so I think there's a lot of projection with this guy. You like the big body and the stoutness that he can potentially offer, but I don't think the tape is very good. And he's doing it in the Big 12. And he's not like he's a one technique or zero technique who is dominating in the SEC. I think the tape is average, and he's coming from not my favorite defensive conference, especially when we're talking about NFL players on defense from the Big 12. It's a very short list of promising players there. So I do think there's a place for this guy, but I think that place does not come until I pick 120 for me. I don't even think I would take him in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I get that. Like, especially his, granted, it's the nose tackle position, so you kind of have to take your chances with it. But his athletic testing was also just really sad to watch, frankly. Like, he just it is what it is. But he's a guy that, again, I think that ideally you probably don't want to take him until after our last kind of mid-ish round pick even. So it's tough there. For me, my second guy is Keon White out of Georgia Tech. He, to me, is a tweener in a bad way, where I think his athleticism was overblown coming into the process. And I think that he probably would be best suited to gain a little bit of weight and play on the inside because of it. But I don't think that he'll have the power and the stoutness to do that. He's kind of, to me, like, if you really like Lucas Van Ness, he's the really, really, really poor man's Lucas Van Ness. Like, that's kind of where I'm at with him. Like, if you want that inside out versatility, technically, sure, he can do that. But I don't think he has the athleticism that Van Ness has or the power. So I think that, to me, like, I think I've seen him mocked as high as, I think, late 1st round, if I'm not mistaken, like the Chiefs. I don't think I'd even consider him until maybe the 4th. Like, that's just kind of where I'm at with him. So the fact that he was one of the visits is interesting. So we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah, I'm also not a fan of Keon White. I agree with that tweener and bad way analysis. My next one is a guy that we talked about earlier, is Darnell Wright. And again, my thing is that I just don't love that as a pick at 17 because I'm concerned about the consistency at 7 if you're picking him at 17. It's not to the level of DeJuan Jones, but I have a little bit of concerns about the body type and conditioning for the NFL. Is that going to be able to maintain consistency at the NFL level? I don't really care about he's a right tackle only. Like, if you're going to be a starter in the NFL, then that's valuable. But yeah, I'm just not as big a fan of his tape. I get shutting down Will Anderson. That's fantastic. He did a really good game against BJ Ojulari, who's a guy I really like out of LSU. But yeah, I'm just not as big a fan of the tape and the consistency of performance. And again, I have those concerns about the ability for him to translate from Tennessee's gimmicky offense to the NFL.
Yeah, so that offense is certainly
Wright's one of the guys that I'm just not as big a fan of. At 32, I'd be like, all right, fine, whatever. But 17, definitely not for me.
Yeah, I'm definitely a little bit higher in Wright, so we're off a little bit there. That's all right. My 3rd name on this list is not probably going to sit very well with listeners here, and that's Kansas State cornerback Julius Brents. I know a lot of people love this guy. You're talking about a 6'3" corner with great athletic traits in terms of his lateral quickness at a player at that size. My whole thing with Brents is I think we're talking about a guy that probably would have been like a 5th-ish round prospect prior to the Senior Bowl. And then a strong Senior Bowl bumped him up. Obviously the testing at the combine bumped him up. And now we're talking about a guy that could be potentially in contention for like pick 32. I think that's way too rich for me for a Big 12 defender who's 23 years old and just coming from a conference that just historically does not produce defensive talent in the NFL. So I think all those things considered, it's a little bit too rich for my liking. I'm really worried that you can get into a situation where maybe you take another Justin Lane. You're taking a traits-based prospect where the film isn't all there. And I think he's a better player than that. But I think that the results in the NFL, you can be a little bit underwhelmed with if you take Julius Brents that early.
Yeah, his athletic testing, I think, definitely kind of put him on people's radars a little bit more. And also the Senior Bowl, like you said. I think he's fine. I think, again, though, the problem is, like, you're betting on him to be a better player in the NFL. And I think it's just going to be hard to expect that. Like, guys that have his size profile And he does have the lateral quickness, which is the interesting part of it. Is like he showed that at least. Now I don't know if it shows up a ton on tape, at least that high level of lateral agility. Because I mean, his 40 was like in what 4.53, I think it was.
4.53. So it's right at the edge of what you want.
Yeah,
for,
I mean, for us, I mean that's fast for the Steelers. So I guess that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it's just again, I think that he's going to get overdrafted is the ultimate problem here. Like if you can take him in the mid rounds and just developmental corner, then whatever. But not 32 or 49.
The 40 isn't there, but I think teams are saying, "Oh, like this is Tariq Woolen all over again."
I think everybody's chasing that guy now. Yeah.
Which I get, but it's probably not the guy to do. But
yeah,
my next guy here that I have is actually Darnell Washington, and again another guy that it's not so much the player is the problem. I just don't know if the draft value at the where you have to take him, and also just the need doesn't really fit there. Again, tight end is a position that when you have a great one, it's awesome. When you have a fine one, it's fine, and when you have a bad one, it almost doesn't matter depending on what offense you're on.
Yeah,
like it's just the value I don't think will line up, even if the player could really help you in the short term, especially, and maybe the long term too. But he would fit the identity for sure of what we're trying to do, which is a big thing, and I think part of why they're interested in him, obviously. But I just think again, there's gonna be better players that you could take there, and even if they maybe not better players, better fits for what you need, especially too. So.
I'm with Tommy on this one. I'm a big Washington fan, as I said earlier, and I agree with your contention about the value, which is why I don't think he'll be the pick at 17, and I don't think he'll be at 32. But I do think he fits really well because I think for a team that has been very transparent about how much they want to run the ball, especially out of 12 personnel, and then run play action offense, I think he fits that so well. And again, I think this allows you to kind of take pressure off of Freiermuth to be that more traditional tight end. You can use him in more diverse ways that fit better with his skill set. So I would really love that. I don't think it's going to happen, but I digress. Anyways, I'm going to move on to a bit of a later pick. I'm not sure exactly where he's falling right now, but this is a guy I'm pretty sure they had him in for a visit or they met him with the combine. It's Caillou Blue Kelly, who's a cornerback out of Stanford. And this was a guy that I wanted to really like his tape. And I think he has NFL bloodline. So that kind of perked my ears as, Steelers are probably gonna be interested in him. But this is another guy where he's really a zone only corner. The athletic testing wasn't as good as I hoped. And the tape also wasn't as good as I hoped. And granted, it's on a bad Stanford team.
Stanford's
against bad. A lot of Pac-12, against a very good Pac-12 this year with a lot of dynamic offenses. But it was just not very good. And I think I know they showed interest, but I think they are so much more interested in other corners in terms of getting drafting them earlier, and they haven't met with him as much. So I don't think he's on the board, but I know that he was kind of a popular guy to link to Steelers because of those NFL connections, because of the style of play. But this would be a guy that, again, I really wanted to like, but the tape and the testing was just like, I don't think this is going to go well for him.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Mitch. In a strong cornerback class that is a couple rounds deep, I don't feel the need to go after a player like that. And what I'm hoping is the Steelers are able to take advantage of the cornerbacks there on early day two, because I think that's where the value is going to be personally. And I can see, obviously, they can do it as early as round one, but I agree with that assessment. If you are to double up on cornerbacks, he's not the second cornerback that I would like for when you do use a pick later on. So there are other guys that I think would be better fits for the team. My last name on the list here, and again, Shayne and I are kind of going a little bit back and forth, a little bit opposite each other.
Yeah,
I've got Dawan Jones.
I get it.
Let me say that when this process started, and I watched Dawan that first day of the Senior Bowl, I was impressed. I've watched a ton of his film. I think that the film is solid, and I think that you project forward and you look at guys like Orlando Brown and Jordan Mailata that have had tremendous success in the NFL, and you say, yeah, I see some of those traits that could potentially make him that mammoth offensive tackle who can have a great NFL career and get paid. My problem is the more that I hear, the less that I like when it comes to everything that I'm hearing right now about the work ethic, the inability to finish drills, and even at the Senior Bowl, even as far back as the Senior Bowl, where he decided to be done after one day because he thought his day was good enough. I just worry that he doesn't have the right mentality, and taking someone that early who potentially doesn't care about football very much is extremely scary to me. I love the idea of what day one could be, but I also think there's a chance that he is Isaiah Wilson, like I mentioned, and just kind of quits on football. And I would be super worried about that.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people have in front of their minds with guys like that. So I get that. My last guy here, Osiris Torrance, guard out of Florida. It's not so much that I don't like the player, honestly. It's that we invested so much in free agency to rebuild the interior offensive line that I think in order to get him, at best, you're taking him 32. I don't think he'll be there at 49. I think that sweet spot for guard is going to be in between those kind of picks. So I just don't think the need is there enough because you have enough at interior offensive lineman right now. It'd be better to take like a center type if you're going to do that, just because you could potentially move on from Cole pretty quickly if you needed to, if he beats him out or whatever. But interior offensive line is just, I think we did enough in free agency to make it kind of a non-need at this point compared to some other positions. So good player, good fit for what we want to do in the run game, but just kind of not in the right value range, I think, for me.
I totally agree. I really love Torrance's tape, love the player, but the need is just not there. Like they've invested too much that would just be a complete waste of a pick. Yeah. My last guy is another kind of later round defensive back that there was a lot of love for early in the process. I know Daniel Jeremiah had him in his top 40 players and said he was the best safety in his class, and now he's cooled off of it, which coward, defend your take. Because I watched Jair Brown and I had really high expectations because of that, and I was Jair Brown safety out of Penn State, and I was very disappointed by his tape. And the way I would describe him is that he moves in sentences, whereas other safeties move in paragraphs. And what I mean by that is that you can see a very segmented decision making by what Jair Brown is seeing, and it takes him like a beat to change direction and go, and because he's very aggressive and he will bite at stuff and be completely out of position. I was messaging with a friend of mine and they compared him to Doug, the dog from Up, where he just goes, "Oh, look, squirrel," and just gets completely distracted and is out of position. And he has some plays where he's right and he makes a great play, but he also didn't test very well. And for me, that's concerning because now you don't have the athleticism to recover at the NFL level. And I think some people would say, oh, like this would be a good guy to get in as a developmental safety. He can be a strong safety, kind of replace Terrell Edmonds or even be kind of that Cam Sutton hybrid player. But I just did not like the tape relative to what some people were saying. And I'd be very concerned about this guy's ability to really be a regular contributor, even if he was a 3rd or 4th round pick.
Yeah, if you don't have great instincts, you better be a great athlete, and he's not that either. And so I kind of agree with you there. And you look at the Steelers, what they're able to do, at least patch the safety position right now with the guys that they have and bringing in Keanu Neal, who can do some of that role. I think that they're all right, honestly, if they don't draft a safety this year. And the safety class is not good. Like, I'm not a fan of this class at all. So if the Steelers wanted to just skip out on it entirely and wait another year, I think I would be in favor of that this year. We're going to talk about the NFL draft. Obviously, again, next week when we do this show, it's going to be one day before the start of the draft. Shayne and I, we're going to be joined by Andrew, who's going to come with us. We're going to give our predictive mock draft predictions, all 7 rounds of the Pittsburgh Steelers, what we think the Steelers will do. So make sure you join us next time on the show. Thanks, Mitch, for joining us today. And thank all of you who tuned in. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow Mitch on Twitter at Mitchell T. Wolfe. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. Thank you for joining us on the Still Curtain podcast today.